This is Bonjour Hi, the Obladi Omicron Life Goes On edition. I'm Avi Feingold in Montreal, and I'm here with Alana Zakon in Toronto and David Sklar in Calgary. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, Jewish nostalgia. Is it a central ethos to the modern practice of Judaism? We talk to Rachel Gross, who thinks so. And Quebec continues to be the strangest place in Canada for the pandemic. Alana, David, have you been hearing about what's going on in La Belle Province?
A little bit, but I'd like to hear more information if you could spread the news.
It's so far away from me, so please tell us what's going on.
Well, they announced on Wednesday that you have to be careful with this because it really goes against like the free healthcare in Canada sort of laws and stuff, but that people that aren't vaccinated are going to have some sort of a tax to pay. There will be some sort of, they haven't figured out exactly what it is. They haven't decided how it's going to work. You still get your medical treatment, but if you have some sort of medical treatment and you have COVID or you're caught with COVID and you have to go to the hospital and you are not vaccinated, there will be some sort of a tax assessment on top of that, some sort of a fee that you'll have to pay.
I love that.
Is this good for the Jews? Bad for the Jews? Yeah.
So you can be medically exempt. Is that what you were saying?
You can be medically exempt, but that they're going to crack down on medical exemptions and be real. Although what that means, I have no idea. But
I guess some people can kind of twist it.
I mean, Quebec does love taxing its citizens more than any other province in this country. That is true.
And giving us a lot less than what everybody... Nah, maybe not. We do get a lot of stuff. I mean...
You get a lot of stuff because of Alberta money. Let's just put it out there.
Okay, fine.
Those swings in Place des Arts are directly related to Alberta coffers from the oil industry.
I hear that. But I don't know, like there's that. I mean, we're still on a curfew, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Everything is still closed. Stores are still closed on Sunday. You can't even go to a grocery store on Sunday. You can go to pharmacies and dépanneurs, right? Which for non-Ontarians means, non-Quebecers means corner stores. It's a little much. I'm a little done, I have to say.
I think everyone's a little done with COVID itself, but I think this is a measure that is necessary and needed.
But it doesn't work. Everybody says that curfews don't work. I have no idea if taxes are going to work. I know that the two things that happened this week is that when they announced that you needed a vaccine passport to go into the pot stores and to the liquor stores, and when they announced a tax on unvaccinated, all of a sudden first vaccine appointments like jumped.
There were like 7,000 people who signed up for the first vax as soon as those things happened. And I think we have to be a bit punitive in this case. I actually think we don't recognize or realize how expensive these things are, that if someone who is unvaxxed and is getting sick and then has to spend time in the ICU, the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that is, I actually think for generally, anytime we as citizens of Canada need a doctor or have to go to the hospital, we should get a paper in the mail saying it's free, this is how much it covered, but this is how much it costs, just so that we have a recognition of all the things that we use in our healthcare system, that we know that an ambulance is $200, that we know even, just seeing a doctor for 20 minutes is what, about $150?
I don't know, because I don't get a bill. I know what my bills were like in the US.
I hear you, David. I hear you.
I just think we don't have a recognition of how much things cost. And if someone is deciding not to get vaxxed, then that is their prerogative. Then if they do get sick, they should be taxed on how much it's going to cost to keep our medical system intact, because it is tearing apart right now.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm totally for this punitive tax or whatever we're going to call it, however they're going to define it. I actually think it's not actually going to happen. I think this is just something that he says in order to show people that he's strict about it, but he knows that there are people already, as we speak, probably planning lawsuits against it, and it's going to get caught up in court, and it's never going to actually end up happening, but it'll just get him to November when he wants to get elected and show that I'm the strong guy and I'm really stiff on COVID. I don't know. It's just like, I think we're all fed up here. We're ready when normal people are breaking the law and having people over, otherwise non-scofflaws. I was speaking to the Toronto Star this week. I'm going to be in the Toronto Star over the weekend. And talking about COVID. And
wait, why the Toronto Star? Why aren't
I don't
you in a
know. I
Montreal
think
paper?
an editor knows me, put me in touch
Oh.
because they know that the whole family got the Omicron variant, and they're looking for people around the country. Anyways, when I was talking to them, it was like, listen, when ordinary people who are not scofflaws, who obey the speed limits and don't do crazy things, when they're breaking the law, when they're having people over and, you know, gathering for services and, you know, trying to live their lives as much as they can in defiance of these rules, then these rules are starting to get a little silly.
Isn't it crazy how even you could like eat an illegal sandwich in certain circumstances? Just
What is an illegal sandwich? What is an illegal sandwich?
I went to a spa recently. It's one of those outdoor spas, the Scandinave spa where you go into those baths, and they had just shut down their restaurants. So you couldn't eat in the dining hall, but you could get it to go. So I was like, where am I going to eat this? So I went into one of those stalls, like a change room stall, closed the thing, sat, and I was like, I'm eating an illegal sandwich.
You do need to eat when you're at those spas because you're there for like 8 hours of the day. And you need
You're sweating.
Yeah, for sure. The illegal sandwich. I wonder what they'll call that.
I mean, you can still eat outdoors in Toronto. Is that it? Have people set up like...
You can eat on a heated patio at a restaurant, but you can't eat indoor dining. And you can have, I think it's 5 people indoors. So it's not as strict as Quebec.
Are there places that have set up like outdoor places with it heated? Yeah.
I kind of decided with these new restrictions to use this as an opportunity to save money. And so I haven't really been looking for places to eat out or doing takeout.
Dry January for you, but on the takeout side?
Dry takeout January. Yeah.
Anyways, so it's a little nuts, but that's where we stand, and we'll find out from Lieby whether it's good for the Jews or bad for the Jews. Lieby Lewin had a video that went viral. We'll talk to him a little bit later. But first, Alana, talk to us about our sponsor.
Our sponsor is Atelier Lou Bijouterie in Montreal. You can get all sorts of stuff. I was just looking down at this ring, which technically I did get from Eric, but it's not from the store. So I get comments on this a lot. It's one of those old-fashioned like picture of a woman.
It's a cameo?
It's a cameo ring. There you go. Someone actually asked me the other day if it was based on someone I knew. And I was like, oh, no, this is some old lady. Looks kind of Grecian. But yeah, but I feel like this is kind of my style. And Eric does custom designed jewelry. So if I wanted to have a replica made of this, that is something I could do through the store.
Or if you wanted just a whole bunch, he will source for you a lot of vintage or estate jewelry as well. I mean, he has quite a collection of older pieces that he has picked up over the years. And I'm sure if you say, I want a cameo ring, instantly he'll be able to send you pictures of a dozen different ones and says, I'll either have those or I can get them for you.
Yeah, there you go.
It's the magic of Eric Goldberg.
And if you're listening to the show and you would like to get a cameo ring or a watch or something else of your choosing, you can go on atelierlou.com, that's ATELIERLOU.com, and use the code BON18 at checkout for 10% off your order.
We have a correction to make. Last week, we were announcing and discussing all the members of the Order of Canada that were Jewish, and we talked about the 18 members of the Order of Canada. This is an ongoing list, and as the week progressed, things, names pop up, and we're actually up to 21 of that list are Jewish. Sorry, David, to burst your 18 Chai bubble.
It's ruined.
But we are, sorry for the people that we left off the list, although we didn't call anybody out by name, so it's not like we're saying who is and who isn't on the list, but we're up to 21, and it's entirely possible that there are more. If you know of members of the Order of Canada that we may not have mentioned or have not been mentioned on the CJN website, let us know. We'd love to hear about them. What does it mean to do Jewish? In an era where traditional modes of Jewish practice are being abandoned, but tradition is hotter than ever, Rachel Gross says it's time to understand Jewish religion differently. Rachel's the author of Beyond the Synagogue, Jewish Nostalgia as Religious Practice, and she joins us today to help us understand why nostalgia is not just a thing of the past. Rachel, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Rachel, I want to start by acknowledging that your book is very much centered on the American landscape. And while there is lots of overlap with regards to Canada, there are profound differences that you likely haven't studied. And so, that's there, and we're not going to necessarily, call you out on that or whatever it is. Nevertheless, can you start by telling us a bit about how you see nostalgia fitting into contemporary Judaism?
So I think about a very particular kind of nostalgia as a type of religious practice, as is the subtitle of my book. I'm looking at nostalgia by Ashkenazi Jews, as you say, especially in the United States, for Eastern European heritage and their immigration to the United States at the turn of the century, and how that Ashkenazi Eastern European culture developed in the United States. I'm looking at nostalgia for that moment and for that culture, and how it manifests in different institutional and material forms in Jewish culture in the United States. And I am making the argument that if we think about religion really broadly, if we think about American Jewish religion in particular really broadly, to include these nostalgic forms that we often think of as cultural, it gives us a better handle on American Judaism and perhaps on Canadian Judaism as well. I'll call myself out for that as well. So I'm looking at 4 case studies. I'm looking at Jewish genealogists, historic synagogues that are used as museums in the United States, children's books and dolls, and kind of new artisanal Ashkenazi food practices.
So, Rachel, while I was reading your book, I kind of felt like, yes, I myself really have fit into this type of category as a nostalgic Jew. I do feel connections. If I go to a Jewish museum, I get excited. If I'm in a very Jewish place like, the Lower East Side in New York, and I do feel this connection. But at the same time, I also feel, while I was reading your book, it gave me the sense of a bit of tragedy, in a sense that, are we then just a spent force, the Jewish community, if we're always looking at the past constantly and never really engaging with the future of what this means? So I guess what I'm asking is there any place in your thinking for what does it mean to move ahead in the future if we're always just focusing again and again on a Jewish museum or a synagogue that is closed because there were too few Jews to attend the services?
Absolutely. I really appreciate that question. So I think of nostalgia as a longing for an irrevocable past. This makes me laugh as somebody trained in part as a historian. I'm also trained in religious studies. The past is always irrevocable. Like, that's how time works. But with nostalgia, we are kind of pained at the fact that the past is irrevocably past, right? We are longing for the past, and we kind of wallow a bit in that longing, right? It's a sentimental longing for an irrevocable past. I don't think that's all bad. I think it's very easy to criticize nostalgia, and most of the kind of popular and even the scholarly work on nostalgia tends to criticize it, right? That in fact that it's a like a ready-made emotion, that it's an emotion that somebody handed to you, right? That it doesn't have a future. But I think that nostalgia actually helps us form community. In part. It's not the only way to form community. It's not the only way to form Jewish community, of course. But I think that this particular kind of nostalgia for Eastern European and Central European heritage allows Jews to come together around certain institutions, around certain materials, and share an emotion that connects them to their past, that connects them in their present through a shared emotion, and even helps us think about the future a bit. Think about what values Jews want to pass on to their children, to future generations, that they valued in the past. So there's lots of things to criticize about nostalgia, about this particular type of nostalgia. But I do think it can be, people often think of nostalgia as reductive, right? It reduces things to an accessible narrative. That's what nostalgia does for sure. But I also think of it as productive, right? It produces a shared emotion. It produces a community. It produces a connection to the past that might even help us lead into new directions for the future.
So my question is nostalgia enough to sustain us? Because you're making the argument that nostalgia acts as religion for people who might not fit into the typical religious box. But if we're losing tradition in this hypothetical reality where nostalgia becomes the one form of Judaism, if we lose practices like Shabbat or Kashrut or attending a synagogue, how much longevity do we really have as a people? And I kind of had a hard time really being convinced that a pastrami sandwich is going to be the thing that kind of maintains us. And I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but that is an example that's been brought up in the book.
Absolutely. So I want to clarify a couple of things that I'm doing and not doing. First of all, in terms of religion, I'm engaging in an academic theoretical conversation. So I am part of a scholarly community in religious studies, especially in religious studies that focuses on the United States, that thinks that it's really useful to theorize religion really broadly. I am not the only person doing this. This is an academic book. Folks who are not academics are welcome to read it. And when I present my work to non-academic audiences, I say, look, you can take or leave this. I don't care. But I'm presenting to you a way of thinking about religion that might be useful to you, right?
Is the idea more like you're seeing this happen, so it's a way of including Jews? Because I know you mentioned the Pew study and saying, this many percentage of Jews is being lost and people are worried about assimilation. So is that your way of saying, actually, if we counted nostalgia as religion, we would not see those numbers? Or is this what you really believe is the future of Judaism? Is what I'm trying to parse.
So I want to clarify another thing that I'm doing here. I'm doing descriptive and theoretical work. I'm not making an argument for what Jews should or should not be doing.
Gotcha.
I am saying, I want to clarify two things here, actually. I'm a scholar who did ethnography, observing living people like anthropologists do. I do it as a religious studies scholar. And I say, look, this is happening. And the other thing I want to clarify, and people who run Jewish communities or Jewish community leaders in different ways can take this information and do with it as they choose. I am not a Jewish community leader. I am a Jewish studies scholar.
Gotcha.
This is descriptive work, I think. The other thing I want to clarify is that I see this as a practice that happens across the board for Jews who would otherwise be differentiated into different categories. So my study, people really want to think that my book is about what we might call unaffiliated Jews, what the Pew studies have called Jews of no religion, what other sociologists call religious nuns, the people who check no religious affiliation, right, on sociological studies. But the fact is, my study includes Jews who identify as every denomination and no denomination. So I think if we look at things like going to historic synagogues or doing Jewish genealogy, that's a practice that is not done by all Jews, but actually cuts across all other streams of Jews and is a way that people find meaning in their lives. And that's really important. That's a huge part of how I define religion, that it helps us find meaning as individuals, as communities, as peoples, and helps us answer existential questions about who we are in the world. So I think that I have found in my research that folks who are Orthodox Jews, folks who are other types of Jews, who go to synagogue, who might do other kinds of things that we think of as traditional religious practices, many of them also find meaning as individuals and as parts of communities and as part of a broader Jewish community in engaging in these nostalgic practices. So what my work does is, if we look at a study like the Pew studies, which have differentiated between Jews by religion and Jews of no religion, building on the previous studies in the United States that previously we used to say affiliated and unaffiliated Jews, and now these religion and no religion categories have largely replaced them, but they're more or less the same thing. I say these differentiations are actually not a good way of analyzing Jews, at least Jews in the United States as a whole, that there are actually some similarities, and actually we should be thinking about religion and the ways that Jews find meaning in their lives beyond these kind of simplistic sociological categories.
So I was wondering if we can play up on that a little bit more. I actually do come from an academic background. I actually, day one, actually, when I was at the University of Chicago in divinity school, I actually feel, and not that it contradicts what you're saying, but I think that the past is revocable, right? The entire work of academic studies in history is to ask ourselves, do we understand this history properly? Are we willing to change our mind or ideas about what that history is? And I think, but that's fine. I don't think that that's really, here or there. And I think that what you're doing is, part of your project is looking at the past and saying that past is idealized to the point that we want to make it something more special than it actually may have been, right? The person in the Lower East Side wasn't thinking about himself as or herself as the idealized thing, right? There may have been an actual Rebecca Rubin who didn't say to herself, I'm so special that in 100 years people are going to venerate the idea of Rebecca Rubin, right? So in that sense, we are doing this work of, changing around. And I'm okay with your definition, the way that you define it, because you're not saying that I believe that this is what religion is, but this is what religion can be. And you've spoken about in your introduction and in other works that you've done about what religion means for the purposes of this project. The thing that I'm not quite, and I would love for you to expand on a bit more, is what are those values other than family, right, and history? Because one of the things that I find, and David loves to talk about the fact that he hates that Judaism is just tikkun olam Judaism for a lot of people, right, that it's reduced to one value and that's the only value that we have. What are the other values that we get from PJ and genealogy and, Rebecca Rubin, American Girl dolls, or all of, and delis? What is the values and the thing that gives it that sense of the sacred, that sense of the special, the sense of the meaning and values beyond just family and ancestry and history?
So I think that is the primary value that nostalgia gives us, that it helps place people in a sense of the world, in time and space, right? That's a pretty big thing. I think a lot of the individuals that I look at in different case studies think about other kinds of values coming in, but I wouldn't necessarily say that nostalgia is gives us one big value beyond placing us in time and space, which is a pretty big deal to me, I think. That's like answering the big existential questions: who am I in the world, and like what's my purpose? But I think there's a lot of other kinds of values that come in the particular case studies that I look at, and those can be really individual. So genealogists help understand, they think about their families, they think about really discrete values, actually, or discrete characteristics. They might find kind of surprising connections. People have said, I have this job and my ancestor had that job, and I think we're both artists, and I'm finding that kind of familial connection.
That was a fascinating thing in the book, about how, and one of the things that connected with me personally was when we were naming our kids, it wasn't enough to just find an ancestor or a grandparent, and I didn't want to just take the same names and bring it forward. It was like, what is the values that, Zadie X stood for, and how are we going to name our kid for the values that are being transmitted through history? So that really does resonate with me in that way. But it wasn't just the value of history and the value of the connection. It was, this person was friendly. This person, loved, beauty, whatever it might be, all these different pieces. How do we bring that down and say, this is what is Judaism for my future generations? That's more of like where I'm asking is like when the person situates themselves because they're eating the pastrami sandwich as a sacred practice, which can be a sacred practice if you've ever really engaged in the ritual of pastrami sandwich, right? Or as we say in Montreal, smoked meat, which is its own unique thing. I don't know if you've ever, you got to come to Montreal and deal with this. But anyways, the fact is that, great, I've placed myself in time and place as a Jew. What do I do with that information? What is now beyond? I am a Jew who does X, or just is it I am a Jew, period, and done?
Yeah, so I think that varies according to individuals and case studies. I think the children's books I look at are often more forward-thinking because they're kind of explicitly thinking about different values, right? They might be thinking about, especially the ones distributed by PJ Library, are thinking about particular rituals. They might be thinking about kindness and inclusivity, things like that. The book and the doll that I look at, distributed by American Girl, Rebecca Rubin, which you mentioned, has kind of those particular values. And then I also want to mention, especially because you brought up Montreal smoked meat, the kind of artisanal delis that I'm looking at in my fourth case study, in my fifth chapter, are actually really forward thinking about what does it mean to have this emotional connection to the past and to a particular cuisine that has developed in the United States and differently in Canada. And what does it mean to think about the values that we have now? As contemporary people, what is the responsibility that we have to the earth? And what does it mean, especially for restaurateurs and people in the restaurant business? What kind of values do they have? So they're thinking, the restaurateurs that I'm thinking about are thinking about values like sustainability and buying local food, local produce. And I think that they think about, explicitly, they've told me, they think about those kind of universal values as Jewish values. They think that they have a certain kind of responsibility to the earth and to their communities as Jews. That doesn't mean, other people might also share those values, but they say those are values we have as a Jew. And the restaurateurs that I'm looking at want to marry those values, those kind of contemporary values, with this connection, an emotional connection to the cuisine of their ancestors. And I wanted to mention this in particular because one of the delis that I look at is called Mile End, is in New York. They have locations in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and they
Noah and Ray Burnhamoff, good Montreal.
Exactly. Who brought that Montreal cuisine and that Ashkenazi cuisine developed in Montreal to New York, and they wanted to connect that heritage, that Jewish Canadian heritage in the United States, to their values as restaurateurs and as contemporary people.
So Rachel, I want to know that you admitted right now that Montreal cuisine is far superior to New York cuisine. That is now a breaking headline on Bonjour Chai. I want that to be clear.
That is not what I said. Let the record show. I do not tend to state my own opinions. Again, I'm like doing descriptive work here.
Fine. But Rachel, what I am curious about as I was reading your book, the people who convert to Judaism and people who are adopted into Jewish families, where does this nostalgia fit in line for them if they are not from this direct ethnic background?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such an important question. And I'll admit, it's not something that I dive into necessarily enough in the book itself. So what I'm doing in the book is really laying out kind of a normative practice, right? How this nostalgia for Eastern and Central European heritage works in the United States. And that is the bulk of the work in the book. But it absolutely leaves people out. That's what normative narratives do, right? So I spend a lot of time working on how fruitful this can be, how it can be really useful for communities to come together with this shared narrative and shared emotions. And it definitely leaves people out. So I think that's absolutely the dark side to this nostalgia and to the power of this nostalgia. So it leaves people out who don't share this ancestry, and it also sucks them in. I think it's that powerful. So I think other people have to learn this narrative, right? It's everywhere. If you're a Jew, in the United States, in Canada, in a lot of places in the world, you're going to have to learn about American and maybe Canadian deli traditions, right? You're going to have to learn this narrative about the Lower East Side. And to some extent, you're encouraged to make it your own, even if it's not. And I think other people's narratives get swept in. For instance, I look at the Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, even though that's a colonial synagogue, right? That has a Sephardi colonial history. It's the oldest synagogue building in the United States, and I include it in my study because I think it's told in the same pattern that has been developed around these synagogues created by Central and Eastern Europeans at the turn of the century. The other case study, the other example that I bring in is thinking about delis. Some of the delis that I look at, and these are folks I will say I really respect these restaurateurs who are hustling, and they are doing really really powerful and thoughtful work about their work. And they're primarily Ashkenazi institutions. That's what delis are. And some of them are thinking about broadening their story a little bit and bringing in other people, other types of Jewish history. So Saul's Deli in Berkeley, California says, we are telling a history in our deli. We are telling the story of Jews from Eastern Europe, and they move to New York, and they continue going west until they hit Berkeley, California, and can't go any further. And I love this story because I work in San Francisco now, so it makes Berkeley, California, makes Northern California like the center of Jewish history. And over at Saul's, they've started to include Sephardi and Mizrahi dishes as kind of vegetarian side dishes. It's a lot of Sephardi dishes and a lot of Mizrahi dishes Middle Eastern stuff can lend itself to like a good vegetable salad, a good side dish.
Yes.
And I really want to be kind to the folks at Saul's who are doing like really smart and important work, and thinking really deeply about how to bring the deli into the 21st century, and thinking about who's in their community. But yeah, it's a little bit on the nose.
But wasn't there sort of like Jewish communities were talking about sort of the decline of the Jewish deli on the East Coast itself, that the fact that no one was coming to these nostalgic delis anymore, that they were shutting down? So then do they need to reinvent themselves and thus move further away from nostalgia, or do they really need to clasp onto this nostalgic past?
Yeah, so I think people were really concerned about the death of the deli in maybe the late 1990s, early 2000s, and each of my case studies is thinking about a kind of development in American Jewish nostalgia that develops in a different decade. And the artisanal delis that I'm looking at really come along in the early 2000s when folks look at delis that were really disappearing for a number of reasons. People just weren't interested in delis, and I think the restaurant business kind of goes through different waves. And I want to say younger folks, but it's not just younger folks, but a number of restaurateurs started thinking about, hey, this culinary heritage is really important to us, and wanted to, again, bring it together with contemporary food trends. I want to go back to Alana's really important question that I didn't fully answer about, is this sustainable in a different sense than the food might be sustainable for the earth? So is this just a culinary trend, right? Is this over? This book started as my dissertation. So I've been working on this at this point, I've been studying it for about 15 years. And there arguably there might have been a moment of sustainable artisanal delis in kind of the around 2010-ish. And it might be over. Surprisingly, a number of these are actually still around and still thriving. Some of them have developed in different ways. A kind of shocking number of them are still around. But to Alana's broader question about is this sustainable? So I think as a scholar And to some extent, as a kind of quasi-historian, as a religious historian, I don't care. I'm thinking about, I tell my students studying history is the study of change over time. And when we study Jews, we have to understand that we are studying Jews and Judaism changing over time. And I think that is the bottom line, that Jews and Judaism change over time. So this is looking at American Jews in a particular moment, and it will change. Absolutely. Nostalgia in this form is not going to continue to be a guiding factor, I believe.
Right.
I don't make predictions about the future, right? That's not, the scholars try not to do that. But the fact is, a lot of times when people ask me this question about sustainability, I don't want to put this on Alana. I don't think you're asking this. But a lot of times people will say, unlike, how is this, I'm worried about this nostalgia stuff because I think that remembering the Holocaust and support for the state of Israel in a particular way are the foundations of North American Jewish community, right? And those seem to me to be more stable. And I will say, are you sure? Are you sure those are really stable? Because they don't look that stable to me right now. A lot of folks, especially younger folks, but as you know, people of all ages are not finding their primary means of connection to Jewish communities through those things. So the fact is, those are actually not that old. I love when people tell me this because, right, we're talking about when we're talking about remembrance of the Holocaust and support for the state of Israel, we're talking about forms of community organization that were largely developed maybe in the late 1950s and really into the 60s and 70s. So those are not that old themselves. And maybe this is, I would suggest that this is another way of connecting to Judaism and Jewish community that will also have its moment and something new will develop. And you know what? That's great. And that's okay because Jews, especially North American Jews, are amazingly creative and resilient people. And I can't wait to see what they're going to do next.
So, look, it sounds wonderful. I'm not so sure that we are, I'm not a scholar, but that we don't look askance when a scholarly theory gets, disproven or whatnot. I mean, to me, the biggest example, one of the biggest lessons of the past 20 years of American Judaism is this massive repudiation, rightfully so, of people like Stephen Cohen, who, basically their major thesis about Jewish continuity is these most anti-feminist women as breeders. We've just got to prevent intermarriage because Jewish women are basically there as receptacles for Jewish babies, right? And I'm okay with saying that is bad scholarship, right? I'm not saying what you're saying is bad scholarship, but I'm always still future thinking. And I know that you're being very descriptive, but what happens when, the 1619 Project of the Jewish community goes and reminds people that a lot of the Ashken normativity of the first 200 years of American Jewish history is really Sephardic history, right? Because all of the Spanish and Portuguese congregations are Westernized, but there's the assumption that because they look Western that they are Ashkenazi is false. And the idea that the Lower East Side was this moment for a brief amount of time, but in reality, the richness and the flourishing and the otherness of Jews in America was, there. And so that, that's still always playing in my mind. The other thing that plays in my mind is, and it's wonderful that these deli people are, talking about sustainability and talking about how this artisanal Ashkenazi world is there. But again, what happens when Sephardi culture is going to have a moment, and that's going to become falafel stands are going to become much bigger and more artisanal and cool. And that's starting to happen, by the way, with Zahav, Michael Solomonov, and that tradition being really emerging in North America and in America in specific. And to be honest, I'm a little suspicious of those people because there's commerce involved. I read last night to my daughter she's 10 and she has a Rebecca Rubin. And I read to her from Pleasant Rowland, who is the founder of American Girl, quoted from your book. And she says, but most importantly, these dolls give girls a sense of self and an understanding of where they came from and who they are today. That is American Girl's mission. American Girl's mission has been a project of defining Americans from its inception. And she looked at me and she goes, that's just marketing. Right? It's just an expensive doll, right? That's what they say to get you to buy a really expensive doll. And I'm like, I don't trust, right, American Girl necessarily with my with religion. I don't necessarily trust the artisanal deli people with religion. I don't trust PJ Library, to be honest, because to me, PJ Library it's birthright for babies, right? It's a way to get free Judaism into like people's minds, and there's this ulterior motive. And so like, you know, when I fully agree, and I think it's a remarkable book. Don't get me wrong. I love the descriptive sociology. I love the fact that there is sacred practice that is being shown in all of this stuff. I'm not sure that the capital, and maybe that's because it's American, and America is fundamentally capitalist in nature. And as a Canadian, there's a little bit of an icky taste in that I don't want that to go into my religious life. But so much of that, and then, you know, is coming together with me. And then to top it all off, all right, I start asking myself, and this to me is the question, if you have to answer one of these, or unless you're going to answer all of them, please, they all know that I have run-on questions. What isn't religion, right? According to this definition, what are the boundary cases? How do we decide that this is not what it counts? And so when Pew decides there are Jews of religion, Jews of no religion, and non-Jews, where are these, what's the boundary categories for people that are not religious at all or have no religion? Because then everything can be religion, right? Southern white culture is like odious, but it can be called religion because it connects people to their family and values that they consider to be important.
So there was obviously quite a lot there. And before I get to the great question about can everything be religion, I want to address your concern about commerce. So the kind of scholar that I am, I'm trained by lived religious studies, thinking about what people do in real life, and also material culture studies, thinking about the stuff that we use in our life. That's really why I'm really grounded in, I'm interested in institutions that shape our lives, and I'm interested in the stuff that shapes our lives. And I think that actually all communities that I know of are shaped by commerce, you know, in at least the communities that we know of under capitalism. You want to think about any kind of traditional.
Have you seen, incidentally, by the way, the Instagram page, the Instagram account, Preachers and Sneakers?
No, but I'm going to look it up immediately.
Oh my God, it is the absolute intersection of American religion and commerce. Yeah, it's about like really rich pastors and the very expensive sneakers that they wear on stage.
So we can think about the intersections of religion and commerce that we like and that we don't like, but I don't think we're going to escape it. Everything that we have in our traditional religious communities, however you want to define that, whatever you think about as like non-debatable religion, that's shaped by commerce, right? And I don't think that makes things good or bad. That the early Jewish communities of North America were merchants, right? And lots of poor folks as well, right? But they're absolutely shaped by networks of commerce. That goes all the way back to the beginning. The thing that I'm looking at that I think is different today in the case studies that I'm looking at is that commerce, that nostalgic commerce has been institutionalized in different forms, has been made standardized in really particular ways. And when I look at the folks that I've studied, my interlocutors, you know, when I interview these restaurateurs, I find that they're generally, maybe not everybody, but the vast majority are in it both to make a living and they're super sincere. And I think that folks who sell things can do both, right? You can like it or not. You don't have to go to an artisanal deli. You don't have to find meaning there. But I think that, the Burnhamoffs who founded Mile End are really thinking about a sincere connection to their family and their communal histories, and they're trying to make a living. That to me doesn't denigrate or lessen the religiosity of it in any way. That seems to me to be, honestly, like, with all respect, kind of silly. Like, we buy Torah scrolls. That's not like sofars are trying to make a living too.
For sure.
But to go back to your really important question about can everything be religion, right? If religion is meaning and how we understand ourselves in the world, can everything be religion? Well, you know, my teacher, the wonderful Katie Lofton, who's now a dean at Yale, she wrote her first book about Oprah as religion, and she wrote her second book, Consuming Religion, that looks at all kinds of things, parenting guides. It looks at binge watching the Kardashians as religion, you know, and she looks at, oh my God, office furniture as religion, like the really high quality shit. Excuse me, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on this.
You're allowed.
You can say shit.
Yeah, look, if it connects you to meaning in the world, helps place you in a kind of foundational narrative, I see no reason why not to use that word. To me, religion is like a really useful and powerful word. If you don't find it useful and powerful, that's fine. But like I find it a really useful theoretical word.
It's very Casper ter Kuile, who's done amazing work in that field also. Anyways.
To wrap it up, we just have one really quick question for you. What's your nostalgia? Do you have a few rapid fire examples that you could share with our listeners?
You know, I don't. I will say that when I started this project, I started it to try to understand Jews who I didn't think were like me. I didn't think about myself as a particularly nostalgic person. And again, I've been working on this for like 15 years. So I was like, you know, a young grad student who didn't think I was nostalgic. Maybe I didn't have much to be nostalgic about yet. But I grew up in a kind of, you know, some of my grandparents were kind of anti-nostalgic. They said, look, you know, we left, you know, our parents left Eastern Europe. We left it behind. There's, you know, these folks who are nostalgic for that world, like they kind of denigrated it and looked down on it. So I wanted to explore something that didn't seem intuitive to me. And over time, as those of you who have done research, you know, might know, we might begin with something that's unfamiliar, and then we get sucked in and are like, oh, I really feel this, and then like eventually you might plateau. So some of these things are things I'm drawn to. You know, I love spending time in the Eldridge Street Synagogue on Lower East Side because it's gorgeous, and like who wouldn't want to? And you know, I grew up wanting American Girl dolls. I never got one until I did this research. Then my friends actually bought me one for research. I will say also, I think we've all begun to think about nostalgia a little bit differently in the pandemic. And you know, I live alone in San Francisco, and all my family is on the East Coast in Virginia. And, you know, I've been pretty nostalgic. I finally gotten to see them now, but, you know, for, you know, a year and a half, I didn't get to see my nephew, didn't get to see my family. And, you know, I think we've all been thinking about the comforts of home and about nostalgia a little bit differently, as well as the dangers of nostalgia with kind of recent political events.
Fair enough. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You can find links to buy Beyond the Synagogue in our show notes, where you will also find the promo code GROSS30-FM to buy the book at 30% off with free shipping directly from NYU Press. I highly doubt that the free shipping will extend to Canada, but you never know. You can find Rachel Gross on Twitter at Rachel Beth Gross, and you can find us on Twitter at Bonjour Chai. Email us at bonjour@thecjn.ca, or reach out to us on our Slack channel to let us know what you thought. If you want to join our Slack channel, just send us an email at bonjour@thecjn.ca, and we'll get you in. Last week, Lieby Lewin witnessed a group of reporters from a local TV station filming outside a Jewish school and then retreating back to their van, where they proceeded to remove their masks without distancing themselves in their vehicle. His footage of this has been making the rounds on Twitter and has garnered him some attention. I spoke to Mr. Lewin this week about the footage and how the Chassidic community has dealt with both the media and restrictions in general. So Lieby, tell me a little bit about the circumstances behind the filming and the video that went out there on Twitter last week.
So what happened was that I got a WhatsApp that the media is outside my school where I grew up for till I was like 13. So I rush over there and I start looking around and I see no media until I realize that there's an unmarked car. So I go closer and I look in and I see there's journalists, and then I see a number on the car, and then I see in the back there's a producer and a cameraman. He has like a little desk sitting and editing. I'm thinking to myself, listen up, they came to our community obviously because they want to have a good story, a good hit piece, a good headline. I thought to myself, you know what, I also want to have a good story, I also want to have a good hit piece. So I go back and forth and I think to myself, what can I fabricate? And Baruch Hashem gave me the das on the spot, and it hit me. And I realized that this guy, this journalist, which in that time I didn't know who he is, sitting without a mask, and his producer is sitting without a mask. So a few minutes later, he comes out of the car, and I confront them. I do like what all journalists do. You scrum a person and you ask them questions. So I asked them a question, and I asked them, how come you're not following the law when you're coming to the community to impose the laws on us? Very simple question. And obviously, like the media, he ditched me and he didn't want to answer it. His producer came out, and I did the same thing to his producer. And then I came home, I edited it, and I posted it on Twitter. I never in my entire life dreamt that by the time we're talking now, we're going to have 70,000 views. And yes, here we are. That's basically the story.
It seems like you, as an individual, you don't speak on behalf of any organization. You're just somebody who's in the Chassidic community and seems disappointed at the way the media portrays the Chassidic community.
Obviously, I feel betrayed when we're talking with a biased media, what is towards or against the Chassidic community in our neighborhood in particular. Then the story changes drastically. It changes the whole criteria, what a good story is and what a hit piece is.
The Chassidic community is having minyan right now. They're having services. The schools are open even when they're not supposed to be. Is that true?
So I'll answer you with one of the comments I got on my Twitter post. So one of the people wrote that one of the French, by the way, we're talking, 98% of my comments were positive comments. Somebody who replied to that comment was like this, as the follows. So you should obey, you should comply with the law. Everybody's complying, and everybody should, you're not an exception. Somebody replied to that guy and told him, listen up, I don't understand you. If you have a problem that the Hasidic community is open and having minyan, having practices, services going on with their life, do the same. You could all do the same. It's called united non-compliance.
But hold on, 22 months ago, when we started this pandemic, was it united non-compliance or was it just Hasidic non-compliance?
No, not true. Because
18 months ago, was there united non-compliance or was there Hasidic non-compliance?
Let me answer you on that one.
Yeah.
20 months ago was right after Purim, right before Pesach. I remember where they shut down all the schools. They shut down all the yeshivas. They shut down all the synagogues, the Butei Madrushim. Even Tosh was closed, shut down completely.
Tosh is a community that's almost an enclave, like a little shtetl in northern.
Exactly. So they closed everything down, and happens to be Tosh was one of the first ones to close. Not even they didn't get recommendation from Health Quebec to close down. They closed everything down to be better prepared than Health Quebec. So we went into this 3-4 months strong. Everybody was obeying. Nobody was making minyanim. The minyanim were on the porches, and everybody was social distancing and masking. And what happened was the government was basically flip-flopping whole time, and they said they pushed the whole time with boundaries. Okay, if you're gonna do this, then we'll give you this. If you're gonna do this, we'll give you this. So the community felt like wait a second, okay, fine. So now you're pushing us off till the vaccine. Okay, fine. As you know, in our community in Montreal, we're 85% vaccinated.
When I went in to interview people at a Chassidic vaccination clinic, this was already in September, and a lot of them hadn't gotten the vaccine. And a lot of them were saying, I'm getting the vaccine, but I don't really believe in it. I'm just doing it so that I can travel.
So what's the problem with that?
There's no problem with that. I think any reason is whatever.
The whole point of
the vaccine had been around for several months already.
So who cares about that? If somebody takes the vaccine for travel, be happy that he took the vaccine.
For sure. I'm not talking about slow compliance. I'm talking about the fact is that the Chassidic community was perceived to be, and I in my talks with people in the Chassidic community, there was a lot of stuff that was going on there was non-compliance when everybody else was complying.
I'm not going to justify or de-justify I'm not complying and de-complying. I'm just going to ask you back a question. And what's the problem that the population is not complying? Explain it to me. Explain me why a Chassidic dude from Outremont who doesn't have social media, doesn't have internet, his kids don't have internet, he got the vaccine or he didn't, regardless. He got COVID because his grandmother's, Baba's, Schwager's, uncle's thing had COVID, and everybody got COVID, and everybody eats from the same chulent pot than from everybody. So explain me why he should be concerned when he got COVID, not now, 18
That's
months
fine.
ago.
But the fact is that everybody sees what's going on. Everybody else seems to be following the rules. All the other synagogues in Côte Saint Luc and in Dollard and all these other places, the synagogues are closed. The churches are closed, except for a few of them. And so it makes sense that the synagogues that are open or that are open illegally, and people are running out of them on a Friday night, that people are going to make a media story out of that. You and I agree that if you're breaking the law, you should be proud of the fact that you're breaking the law. That whatever it is that you're doing as a religious Jew is more important than whatever the government is telling you that you're supposed to be doing.
Obviously,
and you should be proud about it.
For me, 100%.
Okay, perfect.
For the community, I can't speak on behalf.
If you are breaking the law, you should at least be proud about it. So that's good. So what I'm curious about is that for everything, or is that just for religious services? Because I saw this picture, and I'll ask you about it again, just as a private individual. And with this, maybe we can, move on. There's a grocery store, and this is not about religious services, right? There's a grocery store that has a sign that was taken recently, and it said, le magasin est fermé, the store is closed. And then in Yiddish, it says on the bottom, "Maken rein von de back," which means what for us in Yiddish?
You could come in from the back. You
can come in from the back, right? And so clearly there are people that want to break the law, not about religious services, but also about commerce, about business. Right? Do you think that idea about expanding and saying being proud of breaking the law is about religious services, or it's just in general that you think that a lot of the regulations
in this particular case,
or an opinion?
I have a question to Premier Legault, and this is going to be my answer. That I don't understand by hurting small businesses, by closing them off. You're trying to build them. I don't understand that concept. So in this case, I'll pass.
Lieby Lewin, thanks so much for talking to us. I hope we can come back and talk about the Chassidic community again. Your voice is an important independent voice in the community. Our word of wisdom this week comes from Rabbi Anibal Mas of Congregation Shaarei Tzedek in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This is Rabbi Anibal Mas from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And this Shabbat is called Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of the song. And since the parsha of the week contains the Song of the Sea, the song of celebration, sung by the children of Israel after the crossing of the Red Sea. So we have a special Shabbat dedicated to celebrating the crossing of the Red Sea. But in reality, what is there to celebrate? Yes, they crossed the Red Sea. Yes, the Egyptians were drowned. But they still have a long journey ahead of them and no idea of what kind of challenges they will have to face. Nevertheless, the important principle here is that they celebrated a partial victory. I believe that Hashem wants us to appreciate every step of the journey, even if we haven't reached our final destination yet. Perhaps this is why this song was added by the rabbis to our daily services, to have the opportunity to remind ourselves every day the importance of appreciating the simple blessings we receive day after day. To remember that no matter how far we are from our dream destination, today we are one step closer to it. Many of our dreams were put on hold during the COVID pandemic. Shuls, schools, businesses are operating at a reduced capacity, and yet they're achieving amazing things even with those limitations. You know what? That's something to celebrate. We may not be at a place where we would like to be, but nevertheless, we should say like Moses, Miriam, and all the Israelites, Mi chamocha ba'elim Hashem, who is like you, Hashem. Thank you for the blessings of today. Shabbat Shalom.
And now it's time for our Nachas of the Week, where we talk about things that make us feel good about being Jewish this week. Alana, what's your Nachas?
I just signed up for something that I think is kind of a fun idea. It's called Music Before Shabbat, musicbeforeshabbat.com. On the website, it says, Jewish music captures the history of a civilization. Jewish music catches the nuances of the yearnings and pleasures of the human being throughout millennia. Sign up and receive one piece of Jewish music with some fun facts just before the weekend. So it's totally free. And you can sign up on their website, musicbeforeshabbat.com, and get like a new piece of music to listen to every week. So this weekend is Shabbat Shira. We're going to be reading Parsha Beshalach. And so it's called Shabbat Shira because it has the song that was sung by the people of Israel after the splitting of the Red Sea. So how appropriate to sign up to get your piece of free Shabbat music now, if you would like to join me.
The classic one is the Az Yashir. That's what shows up in this week's Torah portion, right? That shows up in the daily prayer. And I'm sure there were many other songs that they were singing. They had a whole week of like Exodus to like get to the sea, and then when they get out, that's when they sing Az Yashir. But I'm sure there was lots of songs. I don't know. You think they sang some Hallelujah? They probably sang some Hallelujah, but not the Leonard Cohen.
Some Leonard Cohen Hallelujah. That's what I was thinking, yes.
David, what's your nachas?
It goes to Rivka Campbell this week. She is on our sister podcast, Rivkush. Last weekend, she hosted an online event entitled Building Bridges, Celebrating Diversity in Jewish Life. So I learned a lot about Rivka's experience as a Jew of color with a Jamaican background. She really delved into the history of Jews from Jamaica, about, they even obtained their full rights before any of the other Jews in the rest of the British Empire. I learned that, Jamaica saved a lot of Jews in the Holocaust, about her dreams to go to Israel, her experiences in Arad, Israel, and about Black Lives Matter, all from Rivka's point of view. So it was really wonderful to hear from that. Thanks, Rivka.
Very cool. We'll put the link to that in the show notes. I'm sure you can still watch it. The other thing that's coming up this week, in addition to being Shabbat Shira, but next week, Sunday night and Monday, is Tu B'Shvat. And Tu B'Shvat is the holiday of the trees in Israel. It's the Arbor Day, Eco Day, Sustainability Day. It's the least Canadian holiday you can possibly imagine in January. One of the things that people do on Tu B'Shvat, though, is they eat a lot of foods from Israel, and especially the 7 species. So I want to highlight 2 of my secret ingredients that are my secret weapons in the kitchen that I use all the time, and that's pomegranate molasses and date syrup. As a matter of fact, date syrup, date honey, it's called silan, and it is what we refer to when we say the land is flowing with milk and honey. The honey there is actually referring to date honey. And I use it in everything. Date honey is amazing. Pomegranate molasses, I make cocktails with it. It's such a killer ingredient. It's funny, I was thinking about that this morning, these 2 things that are of the 7 species in Israel. And I was like, wait, you can have liquid wheat, right? You can just have a glass of whiskey. And liquid barley, right, is beer, right? And grapes are wine, and pomegranate molasses and date syrup and olive oil, and then I got stuck on figs, and I couldn't think of any aside from fig arak, and so that was my 7th all the way round, right? So there's some alcohol in there and some other things, but that was the liquid 7 species that hit me, and there we go.
So if I wanted to get some silan or pomegranate molasses, is it easy to come by in a grocery store, or do I have to go to a specialty store?
So in the kosher grocery stores will almost invariably, the ones that have a selection of Israeli foods, will have silan. You can probably even find 3-4 different brands at any good kosher
in Toronto,
store.
probably.
I have a harder time finding pomegranate molasses. In the States, there was a couple of brands that were always reliably kosher in all the grocery stores. Here, I actually end up finding them more in the Middle Eastern stores. And I'll even find a brand or 2 that has a kosher certification on it. It's entirely possible it's available online, but I know that I go to Adonis here, and I know that they have a brand, and when I go, I'll stock up on 4 or 5 bottles because it doesn't go bad, and pomegranate molasses are awesome. But yeah, check it out. And I'm sure it's available without certification just about anywhere you can get Middle Eastern foods. Pomegranate molasses is a staple there. Yeah.
I think the most kosher thing I can find in my Safeway grocery store is Beasley's, Bamba, and some Montreal
is it matzo ball mix?
Matzo ball mix for sure is there, and some Montreal cheese bagels.
Oh, whoa! You have cheese bagels there in Vancouver.
They're frozen, and you have to heat them up.
That's really rare. People in Toronto don't know what a cheese bagel is. It's such a Montreal staple item. People are like, oh, a bagel with a slice of cheese? Yeah. I'm like, no.
No, exactly. And I used to love it.
Montreal.
I used to love it as a kid, and then I realized just how fattening it was, and I said, oh, I can't do this often.
Right, it's like phyllo dough, and
I feel like we need to do an episode all about the cheese bagel.
Ooh, like the history of the cheese bagel?
It's been underrepresented in our Jewish
the
cuisine.
Lore,
Do we get on like a
absolutely,
representative
yes.
from Montreal Kosher Bakery?
All of the above, yes. Let's talk about this
Okay.
further. Thank you so much for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending January 14th, Shabbat Shirah. Our producer is Michael Freeman. Technical production is by Andre Goulet. Our music is by So Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. As always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca, find us on Twitter at bonjourchai, or join us on our Slack channel, The Frozen Chosen. I'm Avi Feingold.
I'm Ilana Zakon.
And I'm David Sklar.